Good Country People by Flannery O'Connor, 2 of 7. When Miss Hopewell thought the name Hulga, she thought of a broad, blank hull of a battleship. She would not use it. She continued to call her Joy to the girl, and the girl responded, but in a purely mechanical way. Hulga had learned to tolerate Miss Freeman, who saved her from taking walks with her mother. Even Gleneece and Caramay were useful when they occupied attention that might otherwise have been directed at her. At first she had thought she could not stand Miss Freeman, for she had found that it was not possible to be rude to her. Miss Freeman would take on strange resentments, and for days together she would be sullen, but the source of her displeasure was always obscure. A direct attack, a positive leer, blatant ugliness to her face, these never touched her. And without warning one day she began calling her Hulga. She did not call her that in front of Miss Hopewell, who would have been incensed, but when she and the girl happened to be out of the house together, she would say something and add the name Hulga to the end of it, and the big spectacle Joy Hulga would scowl and redden, as if her privacy had been intruded upon. She considered the name her personal affair. She had arrived at it first purely on the basis of its ugly sound, and then the full genius of its fitness had struck her. She had a vision of the name working like the ugly, sweating Vulcan who stayed in the furnace, and to whom, presumably, the goddess had to come when called. She saw it as the name of her highest creative act. One of her major triumphs was that her mother had not been able to turn her Dutch into Joy, but the greater one was that she had been able to turn it herself into Hulga. However, Miss Freeman's relish for using the name only irritated her. It was as if Miss Freeman's beady, steel-pointed eyes had penetrated far enough behind her face to reach some secret fact. Something about her seemed to fascinate Miss Freeman, and then one day Hulga realized that it was her artificial leg. Miss Freeman had a special fondness for the details of secret infections, hidden deformities, assaults upon children. Of diseases, she preferred the lingering or incurable. Hulga had heard Miss Hopewell give her the details of the hunting accident, how the leg had been literally blasted off, how she had never lost consciousness. Miss Freeman could listen to it any time, as it had happened an hour ago. When Hulga stumped into the kitchen in the morning, she would walk without making the awful noise, but she made it. Miss Hopewell was certain, because it was ugly sounding. She glanced at them and did not speak. Miss Hopewell would be in her red kimono, with her hair tied around her head in rags. She would be sitting at the table finishing her breakfast, and Miss Freeman would be hanging by her elbow outward from the refrigerator, looking down at the table. Hulga always put her eggs in the stove to boil, and then stood over them with her arms folded, and Miss Hopewell would look at her, a kind of indirect gaze, divided between her and Miss Freeman, and would think that if she would only keep herself up a little, she wouldn't be so bad looking. There was nothing wrong with her face that a pleasant expression wouldn't help. Miss Hopewell said that people who looked on the bright side of things would be beautiful even if they were not. Whenever she looked at Joy this way, she could not help but feel that it would have been better if the child had not taken the Ph.D. It had certainly not brought her out any, and now that she had it, there was no more excuse for her to go to school again. Miss Hopewell thought it was nice for girls to go to school, to have a good time, but Joy had gone through. Anyhow, she would not have been strong enough to go again. The doctors had told Miss Hopewell that with the best of care, Joy might see 45. She had a weak heart. Joy had made it plain that if it had not been for this condition, she would be far from these red hills and good country people. She would be in a university lecturing to people who knew what she was talking about, and Miss Hopewell could very well picture her there, looking like a scarecrow and lecturing to more of the same. Here she went about all day in a 6-year-old skirt and a yellow sweatshirt with a faded cowboy on a horse embossed on it. She thought this was funny. Miss Hopewell thought it was idiotic, and showed simply that she was still a child. She was brilliant, but she didn't have a grain of sense. It seemed to Miss Hopewell that every year she grew less like other people and more like herself, bloated, rude, and squint-eyed, and she said such strange things. To her own mother she had said, without warning, without excuse, standing up in the middle of a meal, with her face purple and her mouth half full. "Woman, do you ever look inside? Do you ever look inside and see what you are not? God!" she had cried, sinking down again, staring at her plate. Malebranche was right. We are not our own light. We are not our own light. Miss Hopewell had no idea to this day what brought that on. She had only made the remark, hoping Joy would take it in, that a smile never hurt anyone. The girl had taken the Ph.D. in philosophy, and this left Miss Hopewell at a complete loss. You could say, "My daughter is a nurse," or "My daughter is a schoolteacher," or even, "My daughter is a chemical engineer." You could not say, "My daughter is a philosopher." This was something that had ended with the Greeks and Romans. All day Joy sat on her neck in a deep chair, reading. Sometimes she went for walks, but she didn't like dogs or cats or birds or flowers or nature or nice young men. She looked at nice young men as if she could smell their stupidity. One day Miss Hopewell had picked up one of the books the girl had just put down, and opening at random she read, "Science, on the other hand, has to assert its soberness and seriousness afresh, and declare that it is concerned solely with what is. Nothing. How can it be for science anything but a horror and a phantasm? If science is right, then one thing stands firm. Science wishes to know nothing of nothing. Such is after all the strictly scientific approach to nothing. We know it by wishing to know nothing of nothing." These words had been underlined with a blue pencil, and they worked on Miss Hopewell like some evil incantation in gibberish. She shut the book quickly and went out of the room as if she were having a chill. This morning, when the girl came in, Miss Freeman was on caramel. "She'd thrown up 4 times after supper," she said, "and was up twict in the night after 3 o'clock. Yesterday she didn't do nothing but ramble in the bureau drawer. All she did, stand up there and see what she could run up on." "She's got to eat," Miss Hopewell muttered, sipping her coffee, while she watched Joy's back at the stove. She was wondering what the child had said to the Bible salesman. She could not imagine what kind of conversation she could possibly have had with him. She was tall, gaunt, hatless youth who had called yesterday to sell them a Bible. He had appeared at the door carrying a large black suitcase that weighted him so heavily on one side that he had to brace himself up against the door facing. He seemed on the point of collapse, but he said in a cheerful voice, "Good morning, Miss Cedars," and set the suitcase down on the mat. He was not a bad-looking young man, though he had on a bright blue suit and yellow socks that were not pulled up far enough. He had a prominent face bones and a streak of sticky-looking brown hair falling across his forehead. "I'm Miss Hopewell," she said. "Oh," he said, pretending to look puzzled, but with his eyes sparkling. "I saw it said the Cedars in the mailbox, so I thought you was Miss Cedars." And he burst out in a pleasant laugh. He picked up the satchel, and under cover of a pant, he fell forward into her hall. It was rather as if the suitcase had moved first, jerking him after it. "Miss Hopewell," he said, and grabbed her hand. "I hope you are well." And he laughed again, and then all at once his face sobered completely. He paused and gave her a straight, earnest look and said, "Lady, I've come to speak of serious things." This is the end of part 2. Thank you.